The United States and Canada have always shared one of the most integrated economic partnerships in the world. But over the last few years, that partnership has been tested first by Donald Trump's aggressive tariff strategy, and now, by what some insiders are calling Canada's quiet payback. This isn't the kind of retaliation that makes headlines with flashy percentages and angry tweets. It's a slower, more strategic response, one that, according to a surprising confession from a senior Trump official, is already hitting Americans harder than most people realize. The logic behind Trump's tariffs was simple: make imports more expensive, protect domestic industries, and use the threat of trade barriers to extract better deals. For many of his supporters, this was about restoring economic leverage, especially against countries seen as taking advantage of U.S. markets. But Canada isn't just another trade partner. It's the largest U.S. export market, deeply tied into American supply chains for everything from auto parts to agriculture. A trade war here is like picking a fight with your own reflection. You might land a punch, but you're also going to feel it. When Trump's administration slapped heavy tariffs on Canadian steel and aluminum, Ottawa responded with its own countermeasures. But Canada's retaliation was different. Instead of just hitting random U.S. goods, Canadian trade officials targeted politically sensitive exports, items produced in regions where Trump needed voter support. Maple syrup diplomacy might sound quaint, but this was economic pressure with a scalpel, not a sledgehammer. For months, the official U.S. position was that tariffs were working and that Canada would eventually give in. But behind the scenes, cracks began to appear. Recently, a high-ranking member of Trump's economic team admitted privately before it leaked that Canada's strategy was producing unexpected side effects. American manufacturers were finding it harder to source parts at competitive prices. Farmers, already struggling from earlier China-related trade disputes, were losing stable Canadian markets. Even some U.S. construction projects faced cost spikes because certain Canadian materials were suddenly harder to get. What's more, Canada has been playing a long game by diversifying its trade relationships. In the last 3 years, it has deepened partnerships with the European Union and several Asian markets. While U.S. tariffs made some Canadian exports pricier in America, they became more attractive elsewhere. The result? Canadian producers cushioned the blow, while U.S. exporters found themselves locked out of what used to be easy cross-border deals. From a macroeconomic standpoint, this is where things get tricky. Tariffs are supposed to boost domestic production, but if your trading partner can reroute its exports and still maintain growth, you're the one losing leverage. Economists warn that some of the jobs protected by tariffs may be offset or even wiped out by losses in industries that depend on affordable imported materials or steady foreign demand. The confession from Trump's top economic aide revealed an uncomfortable truth. In certain sectors, tariffs weren't making America stronger, they were quietly eroding competitiveness. For example, U.S. auto plants that relied on just-in-time delivery from Canadian parts suppliers faced delays and higher costs. Lumber shortages from cross-border friction drove up housing prices, something American homebuyers could feel directly in their wallets. There's also the psychological element. Businesses crave stability. When supply chains are disrupted, companies don't just absorb the costs, they often shift production, delay investment, or even relocate operations to countries with more predictable trade conditions. That kind of uncertainty can ripple through the economy for years, long after the headlines fade. Meanwhile, Canada's low-drama, high-precision approach has allowed it to avoid the kind of internal political battles that have erupted in the U.S. over tariffs. Canadian officials have kept their messaging calm, framing their actions as measured responses in defense of national interest. This contrasts sharply with the heated rhetoric coming from Washington, where trade policy is often tied directly to political identity. The irony is that tariffs were marketed as a patriotic economic shield. But for many American workers and consumers, they've started to feel more like an invisible tax, one that raises prices without delivering the promised manufacturing revival. Even Trump's allies are beginning to wonder if this trade strategy, while politically bold, might be economically self-defeating. As the election season heats up, the question is no longer whether Canada will cave. That's off the table. The real question is whether Americans will start noticing the ways in which their own economy has been quietly paying the price. For all the speeches about strength and sovereignty, the data is starting to point in another direction, that Canada's patient, calculated retaliation has been more effective than anyone in Washington wanted to admit. And if that's true, the political fallout could be just as serious as the economic one. Because in trade wars, as in poker, the loudest player isn't always the one with the winning hand.